Hi, and welcome to this video where I'm going to explain what environment variables are, why they're interesting, why they are important, and how you should be able to manage them. And I'm going to show a couple examples of how that is handled, for example, in Windows systems. Okay, so first of all, I would like to point to this article that I just found Googling a little bit, which I think is really good at explaining the overall idea of what an environment variable is. So I'm going to post a link to this article on the comments on this video. Environment variables are basically a way of defining values or defining variables that are going to be living not exactly within the programs that you're writing, but are going to be living within the environment, or if you will, the machine that is going to be running those programs. But why would we want to do this in the first place? Why have variables live in different places? Well, very typically, for example, you will run into situations where you may have a program such as this one. This program is this program is not real, it's not working, but basically what I'm doing with this program, imagine that it's a program that needs to connect to some kind of service that needs some kind of authentication, like a login. And then in order to connect to that service with a particular function, again, this is not real code, this is just a mock-up. I may need to have, for example, authentication with a username and with a password. In order to do that, I could have two variables on my program containing the value of the username and the password. But you can probably see where the problem here may lay. If I am writing code that must be shared by a team of people, for example, we may not feel comfortable with sharing publicly and openly the password in a text file in code that can be read by anyone in the world, because that could lead to a lot of security breaches and problems. So that's one thing. And the other thing is that imagine that we are, for example, versioning this code, and this code is going to be shared on GitHub, for example. If the project is open source, turns out that everyone who accesses that GitHub repo may have access to seeing your code on the to seeing your password on your code, which is a really, really bad practice. So environment variables started as a way of trying to help with this problem. The problem being able to access information in written code in software programs, information that should be private and should be hidden from people who may have access to that code. So the way to do this is the way environment variables solve this problem is that what they do is they give programs the capacity to read values that are not stored in the actual program itself, but they are stored somewhere in the system or in the machine that is running this particular code. So how does that work? So let me say, for example, that I wanted to store my password instead of in this machine, instead of in this code, I wanted to install it in this machine that I am running right now. And imagine that this was a cloud server or it was my local development environment. It doesn't really matter. So the way to do that is that every system, and this is different depending on which system you're living in. So Windows, Mac OS, Linux, and different cloud services have different ways of handling their environment variables. So I'm going to show how this works, for example, for Windows systems. In Windows systems, you can define global environment variables that are accessible by anyone who lives in your by any program that lives in your machine. The way I do that is I'm going to open my Windows Explorer. I'm going to right click on my PC and I'm going to go to properties. This is going to open and it's going to give you some information about your system, etc. But if I go to advanced system settings, you can see that in system properties, I have this button here called environment variables. And if I click here, you can see that I have two sets of environment variables. One that is for everyone that lives on my computer. So any user that logs into my computer will have access to these variables here, and another set that is specifically for my user. So different users who may access Y computer may have different environment variables. What that means is that these variables, so then which are defined by the name and which are defined by the whatever they contain, those are going to be available for anyone in my system who may want to use them. So let me show you an example. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open a terminal on my desktop. You can see it doesn't really matter where you open it. And I'm going to use this terminal here. I'm going to, or you can actually, easier than this, you can type CMD. You can open a command prompt, and this command prompt will just give you access to your system. All right, and I'm not going to use command prompt. I'm going to use PowerShell. I just like it much better for Windows applications. So I am here on my PowerShell, and then you can see that if I Google a little bit how to access environment variables in PowerShell, you can see that it looks something like this. So if I go here and I type environment, and I type a colon, and then I type the name of the variable that I want to read, for example, temp, then what the system is going to do is going to give me a readout of the variable, of the value that is stored in this environment variable. So I can, for example, type, can you give me the value of comspec, whatever that is, I don't even know. Can you give me the number of processors that live in my computer? And I know this because it's just a variable here. And actually, I could create my own. So for example, I can type here, for example, password, and then this is going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And then I could read this password from anywhere on my system. So if I do this right now, I don't think it's going to work. Password, yes, it's not going to work because I need to restart my PowerShell so that it picks up the changes that I did. So I'm going to open my PowerShell again, and now I'm going to type the same thing, environment and password. And then as I do that, oh, it didn't pick it up. So, sorry, because I need to close this and apply the changes, etc., etc. Sorry, so I'm going to open this, all right, the shell, and I'm going to type environment, password, and now you can see that from the terminal, I can access the values of this new variable that I have created. Why is this interesting? Well, because now from any program, basically, I would be able to read those environment variables and write them in here. So for example, I don't know, I'm writing a mockup program, so maybe my mockup program has some kind of environment that I can use to access, for example, this is not, I don't know if this is going to work on JavaScript. JavaScript has a different way, Node has a different way of dealing with environment variables, but the point here being that now I can point in my code to a variable that is living on my system, and therefore the only thing that and then for whenever I share this code or whenever I put it online on the service, whatever, nobody will have access to the actual information that is inside of the password. It will be up to me to make sure that in that environment, the machine or the cloud service, there is a variable called password that contains the exact information that I need. All right. This is considered really, really good practice for storing sensitive information that needs to be used by computer programs, but also that needs to be shared between different users or needs to be shared on online platforms. So, so depending on which environment you are working on, you will need to do some research on how to handle the definition of environment variables in that environment. And therefore, and as a secondary thing, also you will need to do some research about how your system, how your code, so JavaScript, Node.js, Python, etc., what interfaces do they use to read environment variables from your system? Okay, again, remember this that I just wrote here is some pseudo code, is mockup. I don't really know how this would work. But depending on the system that you use, and depending on the programming language that you use, the definition of the environment variable and reading that environment variable will be different. Okay, so that's something that you need to take a look at, depending on your architecture. Thank you very much for watching this video. If you like what you saw, click subscribe, hit the like button, maybe you can subscribe to notifications. That helps us keep running. And this video is part of a larger series where I was talking about fun with WebSockets. So if you want to learn more, check on the playlist and check out how I'm going to, for example, configure on the next video environment variables for a cloud service called glitch.com. Thank you very much.